Welcome to Power Play for June 11th, a day of pot lover rejoicing as another prohibition went up in smoke. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously that medicinal marijuana can now be ingested through cookies and massage oil and, who knew, lip balm for those who don't inhale. We'll break down the legal significance of the ruling. All right, let's go to Vancouver for some pot perspective. Lawyer Mike Preston has expertise in Supreme Court and provincial court analysis, and he joins us live. All right, Mike, all seven Supreme Court justices say smoking does not have a monopoly on marijuana ingestion. Pretty clear decision. What's that say to you about marijuana's legal standing in Canada?
Well, Don, this is another battle in the war over medical marijuana. If I had to summarize this case, what I would say is that the federal government itself has a law that makes medical marijuana legal. However, that law said that only certain forms were legal. In other words, they were saying you can use it in dried form, but you can't use it in derivative form. What they're saying is that you can smoke it, but you can't eat it as a cookie. And that raises the question, why the distinction? And so what the court had to deal with here today is, if the federal government can't point to a good reason for that distinction, the federal government's going to find itself on constitutionally shaky ground. And sure enough, today, the court said there was no good reason for the distinction. There's no reason you can't smoke it or eat it as a cookie. Therefore, that distinction under the federal law is unconstitutional.
Yeah, interesting, though, the unanimous again. Stephen Harper's got a lot of appointees on that bench. What's that say to you about how the justices are looking at marijuana these days? I mean, it's still illegal to be purchased, say, on the street, but you know, the health minister is now saying the Supreme Court's encouraging this as an illegal drug use. Can you sort of open the door or crack to medicinal marijuana, or is this all kick the door wide open?
You mentioned, of course, that it's not legal. You get a very different impression walking around the streets here in Vancouver with all our dispensaries, but that's a separate issue. As to the unanimity of the court, it was a very powerful message being sent by the court, because not only was it unanimous, but typically in decisions, one judge will be the author. That was not the case here. The court authored it as a court in its entirety. That is a very strong message that they see no ambiguity about their decision. They are all unanimous. And furthermore, what's advantageous to the court to do it this way is there's no way to point out that one particular judge was an activist for this particular cause. It was the entire court. It was unanimous. It was a strong signal. Now, you raised the point that a lot of these judges were appointed by Harper himself. It was only a 7-justice bench. The two that sat out were Moldaver and Rothstein. But even with just those 7 judges, 5 out of the 7 are appointed by Harper. But this court has made it very clear in past decisions, regardless of whether they're appointed by Harper or not, they are not necessarily going to kowtow to the government's agenda. And that was very clear today.
Interesting stuff. Now, you did bring up another point. You walk around Vancouver, and I think City Council is dealing with this right now. There's something like 100 medicinal marijuana dispensaries out there. Ron Ambrose took exception to that number, saying there's more dispensaries than Starbucks coffee shops in Vancouver. I mean, what's going on out there? Are there a lot of people with conditions that require this, or does the entire population have these marijuana prescriptions? And I just wonder what's happening.
Well, it's a very good question, Don, and it's a topical one because our city council met for the possibility of introducing new city regulation on these businesses. You mentioned that there are now more pot dispensaries in Vancouver than there are Starbucks. I was actually quite shocked at that. I thought it was hyperbole, but it turns out it's actually true. If you look at the number of business licenses in the city right now, there are fewer Starbucks than there are pot dispensaries. Now, when you walk around the street, you see these dispensaries. They're big marijuana retail stores. They have signs. Some of them are in neon. You would think that you were in Amsterdam. And certainly, you could be forgiven for thinking that all of this must be legal. But in fact, it is still illegal. Only certain producers of marijuana that are licensed by the federal government are allowed to produce and sell marijuana to patients. And that delivery actually has to be done by post in the mail. So what we're saying is none of these dispensaries are legal. Now, why are they still allowed to operate? Well, the City of Vancouver and the Vancouver Police Department have both taken a policy of being very hands-off on these dispensaries. The police department has said that they are only going to intervene if it becomes a public safety issue, such as the sale to minors. So what you have is all these open retail stores are openly committing drug trafficking. And that has the federal government very upset. This is very frustrating for the federal government because the federal government writes the laws. But what we're learning is that those laws aren't worth the paper they're printed on if the community is not willing to enforce them.
Yeah, that's the point. They're not being enforced. I guess we have to wait. You might as well have Justin Trudeau's policy apply then if police aren't enforcing the law, right? So there's really nothing the feds can do. Their hands are tied. The law's still in place, but the cops are turning a blind eye.
The police have a lot of autonomy when it comes to enforcing the laws and how they go about doing that. And it is very difficult for the federal government to interfere in those kinds of police discretionary issues. But you are right. We're living in sort of Justin Trudeau's version of policy over here. And that's what makes it such an interesting election issue right now is which side or which communities are going to be able to dictate what the policy should be with regard to marijuana in Canada.
It'd be interesting. All right, Mike Preston, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.